A lonely cowboy hadn't spoken to anyone in 8 years. Then a widow stepped off the stagecoach with 7 hungry children and nowhere to go. What he did next made the entire town cry.
Subscribe to Wild West Soul Stories. Hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching.
The stagecoach rolled into Dusty Creek on the hottest day of August 1882. The wheels kicked up clouds of brown dust that seemed to hang in the air like ghosts refusing to leave. Samuel Redford stood outside the general store, his weathered hat pulled low over his eyes, watching like he always did. At 34 years old, he had learned that watching was safer than talking. Talking meant connecting, and connecting meant losing, and he had already lost everyone. He had ever lost everyone he had ever loved. The coach door opened, and a woman stepped down first. She was slender with hair, the color of autumn wheat pinned back beneath a modest bonnet. Her dress was simple, faded blue cotton that had seen better days and too many washings, but it was her eyes that caught Samuel's attention even from across the street. They held a weight he recognized, the kind that came from carrying grief, too heavy for one person to bear. Then the children emerged. One after another they climbed down from that coach, like an endless stream of small souls pouring into the dusty street. Samuel counted them without meaning to. 7 children, ranging from what looked like about 3 years old to maybe 15. They gathered around the woman like ducklings around their mother, some clutching her skirts, others standing tall and protective. The townspeople stopped their business and stared. Martha Hendricks, who ran the boarding house, whispered something to her husband. Old Tom Patterson shook his head slowly. Samuel knew what they were thinking. A widow with 7 mouths to feed in a struggling town that could barely support itself. Trouble had arrived on the afternoon stage. The woman looked around, searching for something or someone. Her shoulders straightened with determination, even as Samuel could see the exhaustion pulling at her features. She walked toward the sheriff's office, children trailing behind her like a parade of sorrow and hope mixed together. Samuel turned away. It was not his business. Nothing was his business anymore, except his ranch 5 miles outside of town, his cattle, and his solitude. He had built that solitude, carefully, brick by brick, wall by wall, ever since the fever had taken his wife and infant son 8 years ago. The walls were high now, and he intended to keep them that way. But God, it seemed, had other plans. 3 weeks later, Samuel rode into town for supplies and found the woman sitting on the steps of the church, her head bowed. The children were scattered around the churchyard, the older ones watching the younger ones with practiced efficiency. It was late afternoon, and the shadows were growing long. He should have kept walking. He told himself to keep walking, but his boots stopped of their own accord, and his mouth opened before his brain could intervene. "Ma'am, you all right?" She looked up, and he saw that her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She looked up, and he saw that her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. No tears left, perhaps. Or maybe she was the kind who refused to cry in public. Either way, something in her expression made his heart clench in a way it had not clenched in years. "I apologize," she said, her voice steady, despite everything. "I did not mean to cause concern. I was just resting a moment. Long way from resting, looks like to me." She almost smiled. "Almost. You are observant, sir. My name is Margaret Sullivan. My husband passed 6 months ago, and I brought the children here because my late husband's brother was supposed to take us in. His name was Robert Sullivan. He had a farm about 10 miles west." "Was?" Samuel asked, already knowing the answer. "He died 3 weeks ago. Influenza, they said. The day before we arrived." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I have spent 3 weeks trying to find work, trying to find a place for us to stay. The boarding house can only accommodate us for another week. After that." She did not finish the sentence. Samuel looked at the children, the oldest, A girl with braided hair and fierce eyes was watching him with suspicion. Beside her stood a boy of perhaps 13, his jaw set in a way that spoke of too much responsibility, too young. The younger ones played quietly, their laughter subdued as if they had learned that too much noise brought unwanted attention. "How many are yours?" he asked. "2 are mine," Margaret said. "Emma, the oldest there, and little Benjamin, the one chasing butterflies. The others belong to my husband's sister. She passed a year before my husband did. Her husband had already been gone. There was no one else, you see. No one else to take them. So she had taken them. I've children not her own, added to her own too. And she had packed them all up and traveled across the country to find a brother-in-law who had died before she could reach him." Samuel felt something crack in those walls he had built so carefully. "What work can you do?" he asked. "I can cook, clean, sew, mend, garden, tend animals. I taught school back in Pennsylvania before I married. I can do whatever needs doing, sir. I am not proud. I cannot afford to be." Samuel removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he had never managed to break. "My name is Samuel Redford. I have a ranch 5 miles out. It is not much to look at, but the house is sturdy, and there is a barn and plenty of land. I need help with the cooking and cleaning and such. Been doing it, myself, for years, and I am not good at it." Margaret looked at him with confusion. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Redford?" "I am offering you and the children a home," he said, the words surprising even himself. "The house has 4 bedrooms. I have been living in one and ignoring the others. It needs children in it. It needs life in it." He paused, swallowing hard. "I reckon I need life in it too, though I have been too stubborn to admit it." The suspicious girl, Emma, stepped forward. "Mama, you cannot be considering this. We do not know this man." "You are right to be cautious," Samuel said, addressing the girl directly. "Your mama is lucky to have someone looking out for her. Here is what I propose. Come out to the ranch tomorrow. All of you. Look it over. Talk to people in town about me. Ask the sheriff, ask the preacher, ask anyone you like. If you decide you do not trust me, I will understand, but the offer will stand." He put his hat back on and nodded to Margaret. "I will be in town tomorrow afternoon." "You can give me your answer then." He walked away before she could respond, his heart pounding in a way it had not pounded since he was a young man, courting his first wife. What had he done? What was he thinking? 7 children, a widow he did not know. He must have lost his mind, somewhere between the general store and the church steps. But as he rode home that evening, the empty house waiting for him like it always did, he could not bring himself to regret the offer. For the first time in 8 years, he felt something other than lonely. He felt hope. The next afternoon, Margaret Sullivan found him outside the mercantile. Her children waited by the wagon she had borrowed, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "We asked about you," she said. "I expected you would. Sheriff Patterson says you are the most honest man he knows. Pass. Tor Williams says you have a generous spirit. You try to hide. Martha Hendricks says you are stubborn as a mule, but good to the bone." Margaret paused. "They also told me about your wife and son." Samuel looked away. "That was a long time ago. Grief has no timeline, Mr. Redford. I know that better than most." She took a breath. "We would like to see the ranch if your offer still stands." The ride out to the ranch was quiet at first. Samuel drove the wagon while Margaret sat beside him, the children arranged in the back among their meager belongings. But slowly, as the town fell away and the open prairie spread out before them, the younger children began to relax. They pointed at birds and asked questions about the cattle in the distance, and wondered aloud if there were horses they could ride. Samuel found himself answering their questions, his rusty voice growing stronger with each word. When 4-year-old Lucy asked if he had any cats, he surprised himself by saying, "Not yet, but I suppose we could remedy that." The ranch house rose up from the prairie like a promise. It was simple, but solid, built with timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and sides. The barn stood nearby, painted red once upon a time, but faded now to a dusty rose. Beyond them, the land stretched out endlessly, golden grass waving in the eternal wind. "It is beautiful," Margaret breathed. Samuel had not thought of it that way in years. To him, it had become a prison of silence, a monument to everything he had lost. But seeing it through her eyes, he remembered why he had built it in the first place. He had built it for a family. He had built it for love. "The house needs work inside," he admitted. "I have not been the best housekeeper, but it is sound and there is plenty of room." He showed them around. The children explored cautiously at first. He showed them around. The children explored cautiously at first, then with growing excitement. The older boy, Thomas, examined the barn with an appraising eye. Emma inspected the kitchen, running her fingers over the dusty surfaces. The younger ones discovered the hayloft and claimed it as their kingdom. Margaret stood in the parlor, looking at the empty walls and the cold fireplace. "This house has been sad for a long time," she said softly. "Yes," Samuel agreed. "It has. Perhaps it is time for that to change." They moved in 3 days later. Samuel had spent those days cleaning with a fury he had not felt in years, making beds and clearing out rooms and trying to make the house presentable for its new inhabitants. When the borrowed wagon rolled up with Margaret and the children and their few possessions, he stood on the porch and felt as nervous as a schoolboy. The adjustment was not easy. After 8 years of solitude, Samuel had forgotten how noisy children could be, how much space they took up, how many questions they could ask in a single hour. The house that had been silent for so long suddenly overflowed with sound and motion and life. But he found, to his surprise, that he did not mind. He taught Thomas how to rope cattle and repair fences. He answered endless questions from 7-year-old Peter about why the sky was blue and where the rain came from. He sat on the porch in the evenings while Margaret read stories to the younger children, their voices drifting through the open windows like music. Emma remained suspicious of him the longest. She watched him with those fierce eyes, waiting for him to prove that he could not be trusted. But weeks passed, and he was patient with her distrust, never pushing, never demanding her acceptance. He simply went about his work and treated her with the same respect he gave her mother. One evening, about 2 months after they arrived, Samuel found Emma sitting alone by the creek that ran through the property. She was crying, though she tried to hide it when she heard him approach. He sat down beside her, not too close, and looked out at the water. "You know," he said, "I used to come here when I missed my wife and my boy. The water helps somehow, keeps moving no matter what, reminds me that life does too." Emma wiped her eyes angrily. "I do not need your pity. Good. Because I am not offering any. What I am offering is understanding. You have had to be strong for everyone else, for a long time now. Your mama, your siblings, those other children who became your family. That is a heavy burden for anyone, let alone someone your age. I have to be strong," she said. "If I am not, who will be? Your mama is stronger than you give her credit for. And now you have me too, if you will let me help carry some of that weight." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Papa used to read to us at night, every night before bed. Mama tries, but it is not the same." Samuel's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. "I am not much of a reader, but I could learn if you would teach me what stories are your favorites." For the first time since he had met her, Emma smiled. The seasons turned. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn surrendered to winter. The house that had been so cold and empty became warm and full. Samuel found himself laughing again, really laughing, at the antics of the younger children. He found himself looking forward to meals around the crowded table, to evenings by the fire, to mornings that greeted him with the sound of children's voices instead of silence, and he found himself falling in love with Margaret Sullivan. It crept up on him slowly, like the dawn creeping over the prairie. He noticed the way her hair caught the light. He noticed the kindness in her voice. When she spoke to the children, he noticed how hard she worked, how she never complained, how she had taken an empty house and turned it into a home. He said nothing. What could he say? She was here as his housekeeper, nothing more. She had lost her husband less than a year ago. It would be inappropriate and presumptuous and a dozen other words that meant he needed to keep his feelings to himself. But Margaret noticed things too. She noticed how he was patient with the children, even when they tried his patience. She noticed how he had built a dollhouse for Lucy, and a bookshelf for Emma, and a fishing pole for Thomas. She noticed how he looked at her, when he thought she was not watching, with a longing that matched the longing in her own heart. Winter was harsh that year. A blizzard struck in January that kept them trapped in the house for 5 days. On the third night, after all the children had finally fallen asleep, Samuel and Margaret sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. "For everything you have done for us. No thanks needed. You have done more for me than I could ever repay." "What do you mean?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "After my wife and son died, I stopped living. I kept breathing, kept working, kept existing, but I was not alive. I was just waiting to die so I could be with them again. Then you arrived, you and those 7 children, and you reminded me that there was still life worth living." Margaret reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, gentle, and it made his heart race. "I have been afraid," she admitted, "afraid of caring for someone again, afraid of losing someone again, afraid of losing someone again. But you have shown me that love is worth the risk. You have shown me that grief does not have to be the end of the story." "Oh," he stopped, unsure how to continue. "I love you, Samuel Redford. I have." He stopped, unsure how to continue. "I love you, Samuel Redford. I have been trying not to, but I cannot help it. You are the kindest man I have ever known." "I love you too," he said, the words rushing out before he could stop them. "I have loved you since that first day, sitting on the church steps with all the weight of the world on your shoulders. I just did not know how to say it." She moved closer to him, and he put his arm around her. They sat together watching the fire, listening to the storm rage outside, while inside all was warm and safe and full of love. In the spring, the whole town turned out for their wedding. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony, and Martha Hendricks cried. Happy tears, and even old Sheriff Patterson cracked a smile. The children stood in a row beside the altar, each of them dressed in their finest, each of them beaming with joy. When Samuel said, "I do," he was not just "I do," he was not just marrying Margaret. He was becoming a father to 7 children who needed one. He was taking a broken family and helping to make it whole. He was proving that love could bloom even in the most unlikely places, that second chances were possible, that hearts could heal. The townspeople talked about it for years afterward. The townspeople talked about it for years afterward. They talked about the lonely cowboy who had closed himself off from the world, and the widow who had arrived with 7 orphans, and how they had found each other against all odds. They talked about how the Redford Ranch became known as the happiest place in the county, filled with the laughter of children and the love of 2 people who had been given a second chance at happiness. What the lonely cowboy did left the town speechless, because it was so unexpected, so generous, so full of grace. He had opened his heart when everyone expected him to keep it closed. He had chosen love when everyone expected him to choose solitude. He had become a father and a husband when everyone thought he would remain alone forever. And, in doing so, he had proved that it is never too late to start again. It is never too late to choose love. It is never too late to open your heart to the unexpected blessings that life can bring. Samuel Redford lived for another 40 years, surrounded by the family he had never expected to have. He watched the children grow up and marry, and have children of their own. He sat on that wide porch with Margaret by his side, watching grandchildren play in the same yard where their parents had once played. And when people asked him what the secret was, what had made him take such a chance on a widow and 7 orphans, he always gave the same answer. Love is not about playing it safe, he would say. Love is about taking the risk. Love is about opening your heart even when it is scary, even when you might get hurt. Because the alternative, living without love, that is not really living at all. Margaret would squeeze his hand when he said this, and he would look at her with all the love that had grown between them over the years. And anyone watching could see that what they had was real and true and lasting. The lonely cowboy was not lonely anymore. The widow and her 7 orphans had found their home. The widow and her 7 orphans had found their home, and the town of Dusty Creek had witnessed something beautiful, a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, love can bloom like wildflowers after the rain, unexpected and wonderful and absolutely worth the wait.